Thank you, Michelle. Tēnā koutou. As Michelle has said, the session is about banking, finance, Māori, and money. Get away. Get a good job with more pay and you'll be okay. Our first panel member is Te Ao Te Rangi Pihama. Te Ao is the lead from Kiwi Bank's Maori Advisory Group. Come on up, Te Ao. He's particularly interested in increasing Kiwi Bank's understanding and knowledge about dealing with Māori. He believes that Kiwi Bank, as the only New Zealand-owned bank, it has an obligation and a social responsibility to partner with Māori. Nau mai taranaki maunga, waikata wawa. Nau mai.
Ākina mai ko te kawanui, ko te kawaroa, ko te kawaheke mai, ko waikinui, ko waikinoa, waikimāmama. Whaia te oro rauhoto ki te tihi o matua te tapu. Titi te tōroa ki te matenga hei rauaraha mo te iwi. Ko wai hei ruruhau ti hei Māori ora. E timatanga mihi atu ki a koe me tō tāua nei iwi a te atiawa e manaaki ana i tēnei o ngā kaupapa ki runga i tō tātou nei whenua. Anō hoki a Ngāti Toa, Ngāti Raukawa, ki ngā rekereke oe nei maunga e mihi ana, e mihi ana. Ki te kai kumihanga, nā wira rau mai oe nei kai kōrero e nei minenga, kia wawahi nei ngā ara tuatea mo tō tātou nei mutunga o te mahi. Ko reire mihi ana ki a koe me tō mana, me tō kapa, tēnā koe. Puri noi tēnei, whare, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, mai tātou.
Tēnā koe iho. Our second panel member, Tony Kerr. Tony has been in banking for 30 years in private banking and in financial markets. Must have just got in there straight out of primary school, I think. She's worked in New Zealand, Australia and Hong Kong. She's an independent director in iwi and non-iwi organisations. And when the Reserve Bank governor, his decisions have been questioned, who are you going to call? Tony Kerr, come on up. Ngā me i Ngāti Tūwharetoa, Ngāti Raukawa. Third and final panel member, Teresa Tapania Ashton, is an international banker too. She rose to the position of VP of Citibank, a former CEO of the Māori Women's Development Inc. Again, she's on a number of boards. She has more awards than the movie Titanic. Come on up, Teresa. Nau mai ngā pui. Nau mai whakatau mai koutou. First question, a one-word association from the panel members, Māori and banks. In one word, what's your word?
So I don't follow rules, so I've got two words. And that's mana enhancing.
Yep. Good.
Kia ora. Tāwhiao. Our King Tāwhiao in 1886 was the one to set up Te Peke Aotearoa, the first bank of New Zealand. Kia ora.
Cool.
I always want to go last because I never follow rules. My one word is, I have to put it into context first. Make sure we can all hear. Thanks. So my one word I have to put into context first because it's really on my background with SMEs, and I would have to say at the moment, inequity.
Good words, each and every one of you. Thank you. On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that the banking sector has taken in the needs of Māori and understands their view, or our view, of financial services?
Well, if you, I have to talk about the fact that I have two children who've been bankers, head office in Tāmaki, one of the major bankers, and I watch their growth from a kaupapa Māori perspective, enhancing that bank to the truest form that they could be as themselves talking to their clients. Matatau i te reo, very confident that te reo can change the language so that people could understand. So that, from that perspective, I'm very positive. From the SME perspective, I have to say that there's a long way to go. There's inequities in relation to access to capital for Māori, particularly for women and Pacifica women, and I think that we have a lot of road to toe in order to rectify that. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
So, as Māori, we wear many pōtai, many hats. We're whānau, we're hapu, we're iwi. Many of us do mahi aroha. We work for our trusts, and I think that there's a dimension to that yes, I think banks are doing a lot better when it comes to SMEs as individuals, but when it comes to collectives, and many of us know about te ture whenua and trusts, and so operating as collectives is actually quite challenging, and so I think there's a lot of mahi to be done in that space, but I am deeply encouraged. Tāwhia, I know the Māori Bankers Rōpū have a number of projects underway, and there's a whole, I guess, a momentum behind that, but you know, it's not an easy question to answer because there's different aspects and there's complexities around Māori that you know, banks have not yet fully comprehended.
History doesn't lie, right? So in the grand scheme of 150 odd years since King Tāwhia set up the first bank, we've been pretty poor, right? But I think the last 10 years since the establishment of the first head of Māori role, with the likes of Fontaine, with the likes of Anthony Ririnui, and so on, actually have moved the sector pretty dramatically in terms of the way that we have the relationship with Māori and our internal racism, the way that we are represented, and the increase of Māori, Pacific and diversity representation across all of our organisations. So if I was to look at the grand scheme of history, it would probably be nearly zero. If I was to look over the last 10 years, it would be probably a 7 or an 8. If I'm to look into the future, which is what we're good at as navigators, is that I would probably hang my hat on that number being close to 100.
Wow, that's awesome. We're moving in the right direction. This sheets back to a question that was asked earlier from an earlier speaker. Much of the personal finance and financial capability talk is centred around the individual. Given that a lot of Māori have a collective approach, what are your thoughts about that? How do we get around that? Is it possible to? We'll start with the banker, because it's...
Yeah, I go back to my 2 words earlier, mana enhancing. I think we need to recognise that a number of what we do is based... a lot of what we do is based on Westminster systems, in which don't actually appreciate the collective nature of our Indigenous cultures throughout the entire world, and then arguably our religious cultures, our younger generation coming through in their connective investment on purpose-driven outcomes in organisations. And so actually what we need to do is look at enhancing the mana that Māori have within our sectors, be it government, be it banking, be it insurance, whatever it might be, wealth creation. I mean, actually look at that as a strength, solve our problems, societal problems based on actually the needs of our most impacted people, such as our minority demographics, and then roll out those solutions across the entire population, because we know what's good for Māori is good for everyone.
Ka pai.
So I think of probably answer it slightly differently. Thinking about behavioural change, we've talked a little bit about that over the last 2 days. And I've actually observed and been fortunate enough in some of the programs that I was had the privilege to work with the Retirement Commission on, seeing whānau collectives. And we talked about pooling, saving, pooling. And so this is a different mindset of whānau who have, I guess, accumulated some knowledge, understood the power of the collective, and have basically decided that they're going to approach the banks differently. And we've seen that work really well. It's not widespread, and I think it's a practice that we need to learn or share. So I think, yeah, there's really a change in behaviour towards the banks. And then in terms of the banks themselves, yeah, as I said, there's a lot of good work being done, but in many respects, you know, the way in which the system is structured, it doesn't really cater. Like, you look at the classifications, and I get very hoha, which means very annoyed. You know, personal, you know, business, you know, you're a corporate, you're this. They put people into boxes, and the boxes that you know, whānau collectives don't simply fit into those boxes. So there needs to be a reimagining of what that looks like to reflect the needs of communities, and that includes Pacifica and other and families that look beyond just a small nuclear family. Kia ora.
And one step of what you've spoken about is the fact that banks are now prepared to accept more than one KiwiSaver account holder to buy a house, which is a positive move.
Yes, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said, but I think it's all about our worldviews. From a, you know, we see Tyrone's perspective and the community's perspective, you know, this is about our values that are really bringing us together, and not individually but collectively. And I think if that can emanate within the banking sector, then that will be, you know, we'll all be better off at the end of the day. I was very lucky, and I'm looking at the MWDI team. I wanted to give a shout out to Linda, the new CEO. You know, and we've seen a lot of our work, because in our work it's about wahine Māori and their whānau, because you can't go, you know, we're going to always think about the extension of ourselves, and that's about our values.
Can I just add something in terms of the core of it, right? So the core principle behind banking is securitization, right? It's the secondary takeout. If we look at Indigenous cultures, including Māori, and go, well, actually, the view of ownership doesn't exist, right? Māori view is that we are custodians, okay? So this conversation around home ownership is actually foreign to us. We are more custodians of the land. We are custodians of the Pākehā term, chattels on the land. And so all we are really looking for is a safe, long-term space in which we can thrive as a community, right? So I think we actually need to mature a little bit more away from the colonial mindset that is, we must own a home to be successful, right? We actually need to mature into actually what does being secure within our environment actually look like outside of just home ownership. Because, I mean, we've heard it a number of times today, that's actually just unattainable, right? So, and then there's a maturity in terms of the banking sector around actually how do we shift that core principle of securitization, because we know the fastest growing sector of our population is has low home ownership rates, right? And we know that young people are consistently telling us that that's actually a pipe dream, and that's unattainable for them apart from if they're given intergenerational wealth, right? So when I talk about mana enhancing, we need to go, actually, well, there's a realization in this, okay? And if we look at sustainable business models, the only sustainable businesses are the ones that actually pivot to the needs of their communities, their customers, right?
Can I just jump in there? Teresa, Tony, what do you think about that? The custodial role versus the only game in town.
Yeah, I totally understand and totally agree with that. However, if we do own a home, I tend to think that we're about the future as well, because it's about our worldview, it's about our values, and that if we do own our own home, it's a papakainga for the future. So we're looking to our mokopuna that they will take over this asset. And so it's a bit of both. You know, I think we live in both worlds. Colonisation has helped us to do that. And so it's how do we manage both? I think that's the key.
Yeah, there's not much more to add. I mean, I think we can take the best of both worlds. I think they sit alongside.
Te Ao raises a good point. Is home ownership a pipe dream for most Māori?
I think everyone's allowed to have a dream, number one. And whatever that dream is, people like Tyrone will make sure that they have all the tools and all the resources to achieve it. I don't think we should be saying people can or cannot. We should allow people to be inspired, people to be empowered, and what our job is to make that happen.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm much the same. And the Sorted Kāinga Order program, which was initially largely focused on home ownership, is a pathway. So some of our whānau, didn't imagine that they could own a home, but getting down their debt was a pathway towards that. It's an enduring journey. So yeah, it's having the dream and knowing that there's support. We've heard about that. That's going to be really crucial. So, I mean, home ownership in many other jurisdictions and many other countries is not the only thing either. I mean, there are many different models, rent for life kind of arrangements in places like Germany and Italy. So I think that the fixation here, and it is a fixation, and it's not to say it's not a bad thing. And many of our whānau must have a home that they own, and that's great. But we shouldn't judge other choices because some of our whānau don't have that yet, and so it's making sure we support them at whatever path of their journey is, and even if they decide to take a different journey.
Sure, thank you.
Sorry, can I just add one more piece to that? I think the strength is in the papakainga kupu. It's in the collective nature of what those goals and those aspirations might be, and the power that we actually bring as communities to that.
Thank you. Teresa, in your experience with women's development, you would have seen firsthand the potential good that teams and support can bring. What were the key trends you've seen over the time for Māori women?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing I want to say is that, Māori women's development is based on the fact that we're a responsible lender. And to be a responsible lender, it's about ensuring that our women who come to us with their businesses are equipped to be great and successful in their business. So we've heard about pastoral care. So the pastoral care component is absolutely essential because, we want to empower, we want to ensure that they're growing, and we want to ensure that they've got the support that they need, because we understand that in business it's very lonely. And so, that's why you have the mentors, and we even at Māori Women's Development, there are even life coaches, and you get the advisors in, and so you've got to have a community to support any individual. And so I hope that that's the trend that we see for the future in any financial sector as a responsible lender, because if to do anything else, we're actually all about profit versus tikanga versus our values, and so because it's more profitable that actually the business does default. That's the wrong mentality, and so for me, I want that to be the trend. The trend that we see in Māori women's development, and the years that I was here, is really that women are hungry and eager to be successful in business. That we are still very entrepreneurial, that anything can happen, and that we actually want to make a difference for our family and our future. And I think that we have all the responsibility to make that happen.
Cool. Comments? Okay, thank you. Tony, in your focus on Māori financial capability, what have you observed across the banking sector that is best practice?
Yeah, just to preface best practice, because I think, and I was talking to Celia, I think one of the bankers yesterday, just about conduct. And so if you look at, if what banking does, so this is more of a general comment around banking, we hope that they put the customers at the heart of what they do, and that's part of when thinking about what the product and services needs are, and making sure that customers understand, what they're getting into. And so there's an element of support that goes with that. And that's but particularly in the case of Māori, in the sense that, as I mentioned earlier, there are some specific kind of arrangements or structures that many banks aren't that familiar with, and they don't have the expertise necessarily readily accessible. So for me, best practice is really, if genuinely customers are at the heart of what you do, then you have an obligation to understand and also mana enhancing, like in terms of the engagement, it's, this whole idea of relationship, whakawhanaungatanga, there needs to be a connection. It's not an account, it's a person or a whānau, and that they are treated, that they are listened to, they are heard, that they are responded to. So all of those basic, it's some of this stuff is so basic, it's like a basic human right. I think Pasi was talking about, some common principles, but all of those So that's best practice. So that was kind of a long-winded way of saying, what do I expect? And some banks are very much on the way towards that, I would say. But having advocates within, and also ambassadors within an organisation is not the same as having that widespread. And I think there's work to be done, and the way that will be supported, as you'll see, and there are examples where we've got Māori on the board. So representation, we talk about representation, that's also at the top table. That's the decision makers. We need to see that, and also in terms of the staff and investment in the staff. So there's a range of ways in which that I look at, and as an investor, you want to be able to see that they are, that they are living their values. And you see that represented both at the board table, the way they invest in their staff, I think.
Indeed. When I read your bio, one of the things that you're passionate about is helping Kiwi Bank understand Māori worldview, which is what Tony was speaking about to a degree. How are they going? Or how's Kiwi Bank going and the rest?
An unbiased opinion. No, so I'm not going to answer the question in terms of how we're going. I think that's actually up to our communities to share back to us, right? What's important, what's not important. But the trajectory that we've gone down is based on the feedback that we had when we developed our Otaki Māori, and that was Māori don't want a specialised business development unit. We don't want a policy team on the side that everything gets referred to. Actually, Kiwi Bank has 2,000 really fantastic subject matter experts. So how do we go about using Te Ao Māori to uplift their capability to engage with our communities, right? It's a long-term game. We're not going out making billions of dollars. It is about how we can wake up each day and be 1% better. And I think one of the critical things that our CEO decided about 3 years ago was actually he had set up a unit within his office of Māori advisory. Shout out to Julia Jackson, who's our head of purpose and sustainability, and then our other two colleagues are head of corporate affairs and head of sustainable finance. And that was because he wanted the whole organisation to know the mana that our roles have and the requirement that actually all of our subject matters become business as usual across the organisation. And for me, my ultimate goal is to do myself out of a job.
Perfect. What's your stance and feeling on banks posting the biggest profits on record in the current economic climate with so many people struggling?
As a purpose-led organisation, I'm going to pivot from the question. So our purpose is Kiwi making Kiwi better off, right? And the way that we go about doing that is through our 3 pillars of making tamariki better off through financial literacy and education, making Aotearoa better off through supporting their financial wellness, and then finally ensuring that our businesses and our pakihi are sustainable, both in terms of carbon footprint and ensuring that they're delivering good outcomes to te taiao, but also in terms of ensuring that they're financially sustainable over the long term. So Kiwi Bank had a small profit of 132 odd million. Most of that gets reinvested back into our organisation versus our other counterparts where we see circa $1 billion go offshore. So I guess the challenge in that question is, why are you not all with Kiwi Bank?
What a response, great. Panel, what does wealth mean in Te Ao Māori? Teresa.
I think I mentioned it before. It's about our worldview and it's about our values. And wealth is anything that you want it to be at the end of the day. We're not going to dictate that it should be money, it should be a house, it should be a car. It's definitely not the case. It's what you want. What's your perspective of wealth? And whatever it is, that's yours to own, no one else. The thing I would say, though, is that once you've identified that, just go for it. That's part of your dream, that's part of your vision, and so just go for it. In fact, I'm going to talk to Tyrone later about his tech business because I'm the chair of an impact investment company. So, it's about really living that dream, and that's where the wealth component comes in.
I'm just going to put a slightly different spin on that because I totally agree with what Teresa said. But I think wealth is also knowledge, matauranga, and the acquisition. So in our traditional times, and I'm a learner of this, reconnecting, with our culture. So what I've learned and I've loved hearing about is wānanga and the process of acquiring high learning. And I think that when we look at money, which is only a very, it's a one dimension of wealth, the relationship that we heard about before, like having that emotional relationship, is that the reason I reference tawhio is that there has historically been a good relationship with money, but that has changed over time. And so it's an opportunity to revisit what that is, and it's really in the acquisition of knowledge. I look at, money as a tool. And when whānau know that it's actually not the evil of the money, but the tool that they can use to support their whānau, their communities, and they can and that's empowering, they can achieve tino rangatiratanga, or I heard a beautiful expression of the freedom. It's the financial freedom to do the things. And so wealth, is that opportunity. It's a different dimension, I know, but for me it's the acquisition of matauranga around that can help enable our whānau. Kia ora.
It's not often I don't have much to say, but this is what happens when you being beside a mana wahine panel.
Actually, I've got a question for you, Tony, from the group, if I can find it. Is there an opportunity for our post-settlement entities to work in unity to set up a Māori bank for the people?
Do you want to give this? Yeah, you go.
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm the chair of an iwi, of my iwi, one of my iwi, and, part of the collective iwi as well. And so, obviously, that's the aspiration, because the power in having our own community solutions has got to be the way to go for the future. Māori Women's Development does it, Potama Trust does it, because they're part of the community. And so the more opportunity that I think iwi get to be able to empower and really make the vision of their people happen, the better the world will be. Most definitely, the better New Zealand will be. And so to me, the answer is that community, and that's where iwi is.
Thank you.
Yeah, in the iwi boards that I'm involved with, what I'm seeing a lot of is a lot more collaboration, because iwi, not everyone who understands this, that not iwi have settled, they're at various stages. So, but the collectivisation or the collective and collaboration is going to be really important, because it's pooling resources and knowledge, and there's no point doing it alone, right? That just simply doesn't make sense. And why is that important? So, we've got lots of examples. They may not be widely known, but for example, there's Tupu Tonu, which is a fund set up for the ultimately for Ngāpuhi settlement. There are other examples of funds where that are operating to support Māori capital. The idea of a Māori bank has been around for, I want to say, 30 years at least. But I'm going to put my ex-banking hat on and just say, and it was what Te Kahukura talked about, is this diversification of risk, right? So I have a natural resistance to just putting your money in one bank, right? I just don't, I just discourage that, because and also because not every bank offers the service that you want. So yes, I think aspirationally a Māori bank is a fantastic idea, but there are other ways and mechanisms to support Māori and fund, and that includes funds, it includes models like in Canada where they have AFIs, the financial institutions. So there's many different ways. The idea, but I think the aspiration is a good one, because it puts us on a pathway to think of solutions. So yeah, that's.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say too that if we do go down that road, we have to do a digital solution with digital currencies. The way of the future, owning a high silvery tower is not good enough anymore. Let's get digital and get our tamariki involved. Kia ora.
Are you ready for the biggest pivot? I think we need to recognise the responsibilities of tangata whenua and tangata siriti. We also need to recognise that there's actually lots of different requirements across only Māori, for example, where some iwi are looking more towards agribusiness, some iwi are focused more on commercial property, others are happy to look at high-yielding growth portfolios. So actually, we need to look at what resources are out there at the moment, and we need those resources to actually recognise the strength that Te Ao Māori brings to those sectors, and then enhance that again through mana.
Kia ora. A question for you, Te Ao. What does Kiwi Bank do to support lending for building on whenua Māori? Is it working? Is it enough? What is next to help solve this challenge?
Thank you, whoever's brought that question to the fold. So yes, Kiwi Bank have a relationship with Kāinga Ora and Te Tuapapakura Kāinga, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, to deliver a scheme called Kāinga Whenua. Kāinga Whenua allows the use of multiple owned Māori land to be built on for the purpose of residential property. We, after 12 years, have Kiwi Bank undertook an internal review into the scheme when I was about a year into the role, and have earlier this year made some substantial improvements to the scheme, which are having direct impact on all of our whānau who participate. Now, I'm really grateful to the new leaders of Te Tuapapakura Kāinga, specifically Kararaina, and Kāinga Ora, specifically my cousin Te Ariki Pihama, who are both sitting at that Deputy Chief Executive level, and have opened up the door for actually a Crown review into the Kāinga Whenua scheme, with the purpose of actually unlocking its potential and delivering on its purpose of increasing Māori home ownership on our whenua. So there will be some announcements. This is a pre-announcement of an announcement that will be going to public consultation at some stage, hopefully very soon. And we invite everybody who has any stake in Māori land, in construction, in development, to please come along and participate so that we can develop a scheme that's more fit for purpose.
Kia ora. Comments? No? Question, do you think Cccfa and AML requirements can be barriers to collective money management and investments for Māori? Please.
I kind of jumped on that, and the reason why is I'm one of these very annoying people who likes to test the process, and I can share a story. I was sharing it with Roger Beaumont. I think I scared him off yesterday. So I'm a person who spent my entire career in banking and investment. It took me 12 weeks to add signatories for our trust, our Marae Reservation Trust, to an existing bank account. That was, and that I lodged a complaint. Now, in fairness to the banks, it's not entirely then, because there's legislation and regulations. But the one thing I would say is it's a real barrier. And so one of the things that we probably wouldn't have time to talk about is access. So it's critical. You can have all the products in the world, but unless you can access that, and banks rely on, when it comes to account opening, physically going into a bank. Now with COVID, we had Kaumātua on our trust. He was unwell. We didn't want to send him into the bank, and I rang the bank and said, "Can you please send someone to us?" And they said, "Oh, we're worried about the safety of our staff." So something needs to shift. So there's a cultural responsive way, looking after our kaumātua and looking after the health of others. So I think there's something to be done about that. So I'm going to hand over. I can see Teresa wants to jump in there.
Could I just say that the answer to that would be to go digitally, because if you build the AML component into an API within a blockchain, it will take seconds.
OB. Open banking.
Months and months of doing AML, the pain, the cost, will all be eliminated. Seconds.
Open banking is going to be really important.
Yep.
AML is something that we navigate really finely, dependent on what the legislative requirements are, right? So, what I would invite is the powers that be is to actually try the process, right? And it's simple because I feel like all of us in our organisations, when we're making policy decisions, when we're going out to make impact on the community, actually we need to sit in their shoes and we need to understand what they're doing and how that actually impacts them and what their limitations are. So that's my invitation. In terms of Cccfa, there's a broad spectrum of answers to that, and I feel like actually we need to recognise that there's two parts to it. One, that the Cccfa needs to probably be expanded across a lot more lending services, such as buy now, pay later. And then actually we need to recognise that actually the funding that banks provide is generally for the purpose of good debt, right? Whether it's business investment, whether it's home ownership, whether it's, embedment of community and so on. So actually we need to look at the legislation and go, how do we go about enhancing that to benefit those collective or those community-based propositions, organisations and so on, right? So I think there's two parts to it. How do we expand it to include buy now, pay later? And how do we enhance it to make sure that banks can actually deliver to community?
Kia ora mō tērā. Last question, because the time's running out. Ea e te I kupu aki aki ki ngai Māori. What are some encouraging words for Māori or to Māori that you'd like to say? Brief comments.
Outside of high school, I'm uneducated. I started at the bank 12 years ago as a teller. I think my first paycheck, or my first contract was like $38,000 a year. I'm not telling you how much I'm on now, but what I'm saying is that there's a pathway, right? And I think that at the heart of it is if you bring yourself and your own uniqueness to whatever role or responsibility you have, it doesn't matter where your point of entry is, that uniqueness will actually excel you through the organisation as long as they're the right organisation for you. And if they're not, gap it.
I think I talked about acquisition of knowledge, but for me there's the practical application of it. Like I think there's a practice of things that we, the habits. I can't remember the term was used yesterday. Smart, healthy habits, like creating habits for life, enduring habits. So I think that's going to take you, from when you were young, te aho, right through to your retirement. It's that pathway, and we just need to be, vigilant and have discipline to apply those habits across life and to share that kōrero with our whānau. I think that for me is, it doesn't sound like much, but we saw with our program how powerful the light that goes off when people they understand that they've acquired some knowledge that they can apply and put into practice. It's a habit. It's a lifelong habit to develop a better relationship and become financially free.
Yeah, mine is a funny one. It's a bit of a funny story because when mine is about protect your credit rating. It's sort of a lesson and an encouragement because when my kids were young, that was the number one thing I said to them, protect your credit rating. And they'd go to, and their friends would come around, my son's mate said, oh, my mum says I have to be in bed by 8 o'clock. And my son goes, oh, my mum says I have to protect my credit rating. But guess what? They are all my kids are on the journey of their own prosperity.
Wow. So if you've been listening and taking notes and thinking deeply about what my esteemed panellist members have been saying, I'm sure you'll have learnt a lot, as I have. So he mai o a tēnei kia koutou katoa, koutou ngā pūkenga o te ao aumoni, ngā tōonga o te ao tai ōwhanga, he mihi mai o ai ringa i o koutou mana o koutou reo, o koutou pūkenga. A tēnā rā koutou. Kia ora mai tātou. Kia ora.